My name is Rebecca, this is MakingLARP, and today I'm going to talk to you about sanctioned events. Now, I'm sure I've briefly mentioned about going to sanctioned events before, but as I am hopefully about to book onto my first one of the year, I thought I would go through a little bit more detail about what they are, what's the difference between them and a mainline event, and a few tips and tricks for those that are thinking about going to a sanctioned event for the first time, whether that's first time as a sanctioned event or first time as a LARP event at all. In the Lorien Trust, if you want to hold an event that is outside of the 4 main lines, in order to be considered official, it must have a sanctioning officer. So the term sanctioned means that there is a sanctioning officer there, and therefore that the event is covered by the LT rules, but also you'll get XP for turning up. So, for example, a one-night social event could be sanctioned. More often, what you'll see referred to as sanctioned are weekend events, usually hosted by an individual faction or guild. So, I've booked the holidays off to go to the Lions spring event. Now, generally the Lions have an event in the spring and one in the winter. I believe ours is going to be March for spring, and last year the winter event was around the end of October. Obviously during the summer there's very few sanctioned events because that's when the bulk of the 4 main lines are. This year it's going to be May and August. So occasionally you'll see events sanctioned for the time in the middle, but you generally won't see any sanctioned events for the time in the rest of the month of August or May. So what makes a sanctioned event different than a mainline? Well, for a start, you generally have a lot less people. So whilst the gathering is known to attract thousands, you might have a space for only 100 players, possibly even less than that, depending on your venue and other safety restrictions. So for example, if you're holding a social event, just a one-night event in a village hall, you're going to have to think about the room capacity that is governed by fire safety and restrict numbers based on that. Similarly, a campsite will hold a certain number of tents or have a certain number of bunks, and that's going to affect the amount of people that you can have there. The other main difference between a sanctioned and a mainline event is that a weekend sanctioned event will usually have some sort of monster team. Now, during the mainline sessions, everyone takes a turn monstering. In fact, every faction, and I believe now the guilds, have a slot at least for a couple of hours over the weekend, if not twice over the weekend, where they are all expected as a faction to be there. That they are supposed to go monstering unless they are non-com. And if they're non-com, there's nothing stopping them from going down and taking on an office role in the monstering, whether that's applying makeup to people or if they've been trained proficiently, taking on some sort of referee role. At a sanctioned event, your monster team will in fact be a dedicated team. If you have room for 100 players, you might have 5 of those that are the referees that will probably be counted as part of the monster team, maybe another 70 players and 20 monsters. Now you might stack your ratios different depending on what you are personally looking for as a ref in terms of the game. If you need it to be a fairer combat, you might want 60 players and 30 monsters. But as a ref you also have access to give your monsters a bunch of WASI abilities. So it depends. But you generally see somewhere between a third to a quarter of the people there will be there as monsters or crew of some capacity. You might also have people there that are part of a catering team, and usually that, from what I've seen, is players that are there that are doing the catering at the same time, but they might be counted as staff rather than players. Given that there's a dedicated monster crew, and your own faction or guild's referees focusing in on the players, it's not hard to guess that it tends to be a more focused and emotionally intense event, because all of the focus is then on the plots and personal struggles of the faction or guild in question. So where a ref team might have to spread themselves a little thin or be reliant on trying to get people in a certain location at a certain time in order to have the time to run a plot line that they want over a main line, everyone's going to be in one place. So they have a lot more ability to cause events to happen. This can also mean that events are a lot more dangerous for your characters. Chances are at a sanctioned event it's when you're going to be going up and fighting your faction's bad guy. I believe in my death video I talked about the fact at our last sanctioned event, the winter event, that 12 members of our faction, 12 characters died, and that a lot of them were actually quite high up, high XP, long-lived characters who probably wouldn't have got into that situation of their own accord at a mainline event. So the difficulty level increase of a sanctioned event is kind of a double-edged sword, because it is more emotionally intense, because there's a lot more going on, because things are a lot more linear with set events happening. It can be a lot more enjoyable than a mainline, especially if you're a person that enjoys fighting or that enjoys being able to get to do that sort of thing that perhaps you wouldn't be pushed to do at a mainline event. Especially if you're a newer player, it can be a good way of getting yourself known when everyone's all going to be in one location. But obviously the edge to that is it is more dangerous. There is more risk associated with it on a purely in-character level. You're going to do something that's more dangerous. You might have a specific goal in mind, like you are going to a location to fight the big bad. But not all the sanctioned events are like that. For example, you could have a sanctioned social event, and while there might be the occasional fight or monster track thrown in, it can also be the great location for you to have a lot of fun and possibly even intense emotional role play with people. Last year I went to 2 sanctioned events. One was the Darkendale Ball, which was actually a social gathering. It was a event hosted in character by the Darkendale family, who are a subgroup within the Lions faction, and are portrayed as quite knobbish, into a lot more of like the medieval politics and stuff. So they hosted a masquerade ball, there was a big feast, there was all sorts of events of this nature. There were contests over the weekend for things like who changed their outfit the most times. And there was a game of honour where all the women were given black ribbons and white ribbons, and were supposed to give out white ribbons to men that were being gentlemanly and black for when people did something wrong, and obviously prizes for being the most gentlemanly of gentlemen. And that was a very low threat event in terms of character death, but it was still a really intense event in terms of things for people to do, and just having a bit of fun and getting to talk to people that you wouldn't normally get to. So what do you need to keep in mind if you're considering going to a sanctioned event? Now the first thing is, do you have an established character? If you're not, and you're thinking of creating a character from scratch for a sanctioned event, I would hope that you are going as someone that is friends with someone that already plays. Because a lot of the sanctioned events are more intense, because they're generally about something, whether that's a happy fun time party or going and kicking certain mages in the face repeatedly until they stop taking our islands, there might be a specific goal or a specific background that it would be a good starting point for a new character to come to. It's always worth shooting an email to your factional plot team before you join a character anyway, or whilst you're in the process, but this is a time when they can really focus in on you. So you might be able to say, hey, I'm thinking of playing a wandering cleric from a long lost cousin of a nobleman, and they might go, Oh, you're coming to the Darkendale Ball, are you? Right, here's who we want you to be. Here's some plot. In terms of the other considerations you need to think about when going to a sanctioned event, a lot of them are simply the logistics of going to an event where it's going to be cold. The first thing you'll need to know is what type of event is being hosted. I don't mean this in terms of how I'm referring to the danger level, but you need to be aware of when and where it's hosted and what the sleeping arrangements are. A lot of times it will simply be that it's a campsite, and if there are bunks, at very least the Lions factions reserve them first for the monster team and crew. Which is fair, because if you've been rolling around and getting chucked on the floor and beaten up by people all day, the last thing you want to do is sleep on a ratty airbed when someone else is sleeping on nice comfy bunks in the warm. So you need to kind of think logically about your own capacities for dealing with the cold weather, what you're going to need, and if you are going to be able to manage an event where you don't have a bunk, if that's not an option. Now sometimes, as at very least I'm hoping to do at the next sanctioned event, there are simple solutions. There might be a travel lodge or other similar style hotel in the area, and especially if we can get a few people who are willing to shuttle between the two, that don't want to deal with the cold and are happy to shuttle and have cars, then you can probably work out some sort of system where you get a nice comfy warm proper hotel and a bath to sleep in, but you don't have to be the designated driver all the time. Otherwise, you need to make sure you've got your full stock of camping gear. If you are going to be camping and you are expecting it to be cold, as it probably will be in March, hopefully it'll warm up a little bit, but certainly if you're looking at a winter event, you need to be aware that it's probably going to be cold. What are you going to do if it snows? What are you going to do if it rains all event? Are you going to have suitable footwear? Are you going to have contingency plans in place if something gets irretrievably waterlogged? Now, if you are going on your own transport, if you have a car, getting to a scout camp or whatever that's a little bit out of the way, with emergency backup stuff in your car if you need it, is great. If you are relying on lifts, or if you are travelling by public transport and then maybe getting a taxi from the nearest train station, you're going to have to weigh up being prepared for any occasion with just the logistics of getting all that stuff across in the transport methods you're going to have available. So it's worth weighing up the pros and cons. Not saying you shouldn't go if you don't get bunk, but you know your own limits and you know your own capacity, and just making sure you're as prepared as possible for all weather. By the same token, what are you going to do if all you've packed is winter stuff and you get a lovely sunny spell and you are running around in the field all day and actually you're overheating? So you need to look into what the specifics of your events are and plan accordingly. Another big consideration at a sanctioned event is food. Now, at all the Lions events that I've been to, there has been some sort of catering team, so I've basically just paid the extra 10, 20 quid, whatever it was, for a meal ticket for the weekend. As by the time you paid for transport, possible hotel rooms, and the event itself, £10 isn't that much more either way. If you run a really tight budget, or you have other considerations like very strict dietary requirements that you don't feel that the staff would be able to cater for, you need to make sure you've got everything you need to eat and cook that weekend, and ideally you're going to try and want to schedule your meals around when everyone else is eating, otherwise you're going to be taking time out from role play or monstering or whatever to go and cook and eat, and then you might come back and everybody else is off cooking and eating. Generally, if there is some sort of catering company, they will have some sort of form or way of getting them in touch with them and letting them know any dietary requirements. I believe for the Lions events it's included inside your booking form, but obviously that's something to keep in mind and let them know if you need to. The third big consideration to make is one you need to discuss with your own group, assuming you're coming with a group. If you're coming on your own but are attached to some friends, it's probably less an issue, but are there going to be spaces for, and is it worth the hassle of bringing an in-character tent? Again, this depends a lot on the location of the place that you are going to be using for your site. If it's mostly going to be indoors, it's probably not worth it. If you are essentially all going to be, at least in character, in one big giant field, then having the in-character tents there can be very nice, and it gives your own little group a place to spend some time, relax, set up your cooking supplies and stuff if you need it. But that's going to depend a lot on the logistics of the event and the logistics of whoever it is that normally brings your tent. Well, that's all I can think of to tell you about sanctioned events. So hopefully in a couple of months I will be off the first of the year, and I'll try and do a review, maybe even take some video whilst I'm out there and let you know how it all goes. Bye!